Vamos então dar continuidade ao nosso workshop com uma apresentação sobre património vulnerável, avaliação dos riscos para edifícios arquivísticos e que nos vai ser apresentada pelo Mateus Binda.
So, thank you once again for the introduction. Today I am representing the Foundation for Landscape Protection. We are participating in Saga project, where we are focusing on the task that relates to the built heritage risk assessment. Today, during the session, we'll hear a lot about documents for sure, about different archival issues, but Saga also focuses on the heritage, on the buildings itself that host the collections. So today, first of all, I will tell you more about those activities that we are coordinating. And on the other side, I would like to show you some lessons that we have learned during the process, not necessarily in context of each archive, but in the issues that would be common for this kind of institutions all over Europe. So we are starting this presentation with this rather expressive image of a catastrophe. It is important for us because of two main reasons. First of all, it tells us the story of one of the archives, the Lisbon archive, which was damaged during the 1755 Great Lisbon earthquake. And on the other hand, it shows us perfectly how interlinked those different hazards can be. For example, here in a single image, we can see a tsunami, we can see structural instabilities, fires, social unrest, and we are not even yet talking about some of the further effects of such event. For example, the mold growth, scavenging, or infestations. So we can see that one event can trigger others, and that's why identifying potential threats, even those smallest, is crucial for managing not only the built environment, but also the institution itself. So to better understand why this risk matter to us so much, let's look at the close relationship between archives and the architecture. So obviously, with the invention of the writing systems, the need for storing records was inevitable. And preserving those documents had to be connected to some kind of physical protection, first as a vessel, maybe a cave, but later as a separate building. And for millennia, archives could not exist without this appropriate architecture, which took many forms. In the picture, we can see one of the first such buildings yet discovered. This is the Temple Library of Sipar, which is one of the oldest places where the documents were found in their intended location. So it tells us a story about how these archival activities were conducted thousands of years ago, but also it tells us a story how the architecture interlocks with the documentary heritage, and also proves that these buildings that had previously a very strict purpose became our heritage as well. It's not only the documents. This brings us to the archival buildings that we focused on within our project. So now I would like to shortly present the 5 archives that we are assessing risk for. So first of all, the first category would be the oldest buildings that are adapted historical, for example, hospitals, Renaissance villa in Italy, which have its values because they are connected to the rich history, to the strong connection with the local societies. On the other hand, we have 2 examples of purpose-built edifices that were constructed in the beginning of 20th century, which are rich in ornament and grand in scale, as they were representing the whole country. They are also usually important parts of those grand governmental complexes or the historical town landscapes, which even strengthens their value as this built heritage. This is the kind that currently hosts most of the archives around the national Europe. On the other hand, we have the very modern, radical informed headquarters of the Portuguese archives, which is the building itself. It's young, but is already considered as an important part of the local architectural canon and is legally protected. Which, with its value that lies neither in the decoration, like in case of those purpose-built building of early 20th century, and maybe not in the long history of the building, but in this cohesive, consistent style and the composition of volumes that was preserved. Although those buildings serve the same function, they differ completely in set of values they represent. How well to protect those values depends on many factors. For example, the topography around the building, the climate, the surroundings. It's located in a village in the center of the city, and so on. Of course, important is also which parts of the building were chosen for which function. So archival buildings are specific because they require many adjustments to safely accommodate documents, from minimizing the sunlight infiltration, ensuring stable humidity and temperature, to providing security as and sufficient load-bearing capacities. And those issues are especially visible in those adapted buildings, where the well-being of the documents often compromises some of the heritage values of the building, and balancing both of those realms is always a puzzle. And this is where the topic of risk becomes central, because every compromise introduces potential vulnerabilities. As I mentioned in the beginning, our task focuses on risk analysis. And a simple definition of risk would be that risk reflects both the likelihood of something happening and the seriousness of its effects. Risk can only occur when, at the same time, there is a hazard present, when this hazard can actually affect the building. And finally, the third component is the value that could be lost. We try to understand what is at stake. So how do we assess those values and determine which risks matter to us the most? The values at risk might include traditional ones that were established in the 19th century in the conservation doctrine. So, for example, the historical one, the artistic, scientific, and so on. But today we are trying to focus also more on the fact that buildings can hold symbolic and social significance. The process of risk assessment requires knowledge on the building past, current state, and sometimes even its future, for example, through climate projections or planned infrastructure in the neighborhood. And similarly to museums, the value of archives lies not only in the building, but also in the collections stored inside. So this introduces another layer of the issues to the whole problem. And I would like to stress that this relationship isn't always obvious. The archival function itself can make certain risks more pronounced compared to the regular buildings. So let's look at a few examples of these dynamic dependencies between the buildings and the documents. So the most obvious example would be the risk of fire, which can destroy both the documents and the building itself. Here, the safeguarded documents are not only affected by the hazard, but in fact also could become a source of fuel that contributes to the total destruction of the building. On the other hand, attempts to extinguish fire with water to save the building can severely damage paper documentation. So this already shows us these dependencies between those two realms. Another example could be theft. Archives often contain valuable objects inside, similar to museums. And although the threat is directed directly at the documents, it can also structural damage. For example, broken doors or windows during the break-in to allow the access to the objects to the thieves, which could also be illustrated even with the recent photos of the Louvre heist, where the thieves had to enter through the broken window. Therefore, not only the stolen artifacts were harmed, but also the building itself. There's always some kind of tension between the protection of the building and innovation to support the document preservation. It is always a compromise. Sometimes documents are less protected because old windows cannot be, for example, replaced because of the conservation law. On the other hand, the heritage value of the building can be lost due to the necessary upgrades that will keep the documents safe. So the archival heritage also is connected to the furnishings inside of the buildings. For example, when we are trying to safeguard the documents better, we are changing the furnishing inside of the repositories, but it loses some of the value of the whole composition of the archive of the repositories, its interiors, and loses some educational values that might be included in those old shelvings that we'll replace. On the other hand, there are some more tragic events that connect buildings and the contents of the archives. Buildings hosting documentary heritage can be targets for attacks or destruction during the wars or during the terrorist attacks. In the areas that are, especially the areas that are disputed between two countries, like it was in case of Abkhazia, or currently it is in Ukraine. So, as I mentioned before, archives often hold this symbolic value. They ensure that the historical continuity and national identity is preserved. This makes them potential targets, even if their architecture itself wouldn't normally attract any particular attention. In some cases, these tensions are more subtle. For example, the document storage adds significant load to structures that are not originally designed for it, which can have tragic effects on adapted architecture especially. And also some minor difficulties like the limited light access necessary for document preservation. That also reduces the ability to appreciate the decorative interiors storing the collections. So it doesn't cause permanent loss of the value, but affects how we experience such spaces. Again, stressing on the fact that it might be a problem for the adapted buildings. So those were some lessons learned also for us, as it was the first time we are cooperating with the archives on risk assessment. And now let's now connect these examples with our work in the Saga project itself. So in fact, those dependencies were observed or confirmed through our work with these 5 archival institutions. And we based our approach on well-established risk assessment procedures, starting with the context establishment, where we are trying to understand who is managing the archive, what institutions might have influence, for example, on the archive, how does it look, where is it located in the context, if it's well protected, and so on and so on. Then we are moving to the risk assessment itself, starting with risk identification. So this is just a simple process trying to decide if those 3 factors, so the hazard, the vulnerability, and the potential loss value are happening at the same time. Then in the risk analysis stage, we are trying to understand in depth what is the probability of such event happening, also how serious would be the effects. And in the last stage of risk evaluation, we are trying to somehow compare those risks, rank them to know which we need to act on first. But what I would like to stress in this whole process is the thing on the side, which is the communication and consultation. This is a constant need of this kind of assessment, as no single person has a whole knowledge about the building. For example, the technical staff might be the closest due to some problems with installations, to some problems with condition of the structure. On the other hand, gardener or the city gardener will know more about the trees, if they are hazards or maybe they are protecting the building. Sometimes the user sees something more than the manager of the building, but also in the process, we are always trying to use the existing data sets, the knowledge of the experts of the previous assessments, and also the help of government if it's possible. In practice, we have prepared this workflow leading to the risk identification reports. We started with information collection, continued with the risk identification, consultation with the archives, ranking the risk, and finally conducting in-depth analysis on those most threatening hazards. In the process, we used supporting tools such as the vulnerability evaluation tool that we are also developing in another Interreg project. This is an Excel-based method that allows for a quick assessment of susceptibilities, exposure, and resilience measure. It gives us a simple base to work with. An advantage of such tool is that it translates the spoken information into more quantitative data that could be summarized with the visual comparison, the tables that we are seeing on the right side of the slide. We also created templates for preliminary risk assessment and questionnaires for building managers, through which we have gathered the data on maintenance issues, past events that harmed the buildings, or the repositories and their location within the buildings. So we also referred to the existing data sets. As I said, we have collected this kind of risk maps, but also tried to include the climate projections. So we would like to ensure that the results of this assessment will be adjusted to the prognosed climate change, not only to the situation that currently occurs in each of the locations. So with the collected data, we could describe the severity, probability of hazards, as well as susceptibility, resilience measures, for example, and affected values in case such hazard occurs. So inspired by our partners, we also added a section to analyze how each risk interacts with the archival collections and repositories themselves, to give this full information that could be required.
Sim. Tu não te inscreveste na formação. Esta formação da tipo, tu tinha-te mandado, mas tu não deves ter.
Will be translated into numerical values, allowing for the risk ranking and prioritization that I mentioned before, and also the visual presentation. So this approach also allows us to create those intuitive, easy to read, color-coded risk matrix and detailed graphs that contain more of this base information also about the relation to the documentary heritage. So each archive has a distinct risk profile. Of 5 examples, the Budapest one, the Florence one are the most contrasting between each other, and I think they are the most representative for this comparison. So first one is located in the rural setting that faces the most natural risks, obviously, with high susceptibility to landslides, greatest risk of earthquakes and wildfires. However, its repositories are located in a new purpose-built facility, which minimizes the risk to the documents itself. On the other hand, Hungarian archive is affected by multiple risks connected to the urban setting. It includes tourism and potential development pressure. There were plans, for example, to reconstruct the iconic tower that was lost during the war and was part of the archive, and expand the institution by a new wing. Also, the city plans a huge infrastructure project to build a rail tunnel exactly under the site. So both of those developments that could potentially put into motion a number of hazards that could affect the site, not only help it, but also trigger other hazards that might be not today noticeable. Generally, the levels of risk of the surveyed archives is low, especially in case of those purpose-built facilities. This could be obviously expected as such important institutions in scale of the whole nation are not located in random buildings without greater thought behind it. So the variety of challenges in each place is great, and with each of the archives we will in the future focus on investigating the most threatening risk in depth and also preparing action plans how to mitigate their effects. So why does this all matter for the building managers and the archivists themselves? So first of all, risk analysis supports prevention, preparedness, response. It lets us understand and take into consideration which risks are intersecting and how one could affect another. Also, it is a kind of a map that offers multiple paths and helps us in informed decision making, even if we are not thinking on the risk mitigation, but we could consult any decision that we are making with the collected data sets. So for archival institutions, assessing risk for the buildings also means protecting the documents that are stored inside. These two aspects cannot be separated and often are a source of hazard or tension, forcing the site managers to make decisions that might compromise one value to another. And that's why learning about the site values, about the hazards, the vulnerabilities is so crucial. And I would like to end this short presentation with a conclusion. Let us always remember that the archives guard our memory twice through the documents they contain, but also are responsible for the architectural shells that give those documents a safe home. Thank you very much, and I will pass the floor.
Muito obrigado. Mateus, thank you so much for your presentation. Eu gostaria aqui de fazer só um breve comentário em português para salientar a importância desta ferramenta de avaliação de riscos que foi desenvolvida pela FOC, pelo Mateus e pela sua equipa, e que, de facto, nos ajudou imenso e acho que pode ajudar qualquer organização. Essa ferramenta irá estar disponível também para utilização, para facilmente conseguirmos fazer uma avaliação de riscos, porque sem termos essa avaliação de riscos feita, depois dificilmente conseguimos fazer um bom planeamento. Eu penso que esta é uma matéria que também aqui a ANEPS já abordou. Penso que a nossa legislação já refere bem isso, não é? Portanto, simplesmente aqui, se calhar, temos uma ferramenta que está testada a nível europeu, para poder ser utilizada por qualquer organismo que pretenda, enfim, utilizá-la. Muito obrigada.